Welcome to the Creative Condition podcast with me, Ben Talon, illustrator and creativity coach, founder of the Creative Condition, artist and writer. I bring 20 years of creative industry experience and a lifelong love of creativity, a fundamental pillar of human happiness, to you through ongoing personal exploration and the shared experiences of others. You'll get a nourishing mix of creative industry professionals and people far and wide using creativity in ways that can take our learning to the next level so we can maximise our unique blend. The show's been supported from day one by Illustration X, a tremendous illustration agency representing a shining global roster of illustrators and animators over at illustrationx.com. The music for the show is by Dirty Freud, who you can listen to now on all good streaming services. And for everything else, for my coaching, resources and inspiration, head to thecreativecondition.com.
We're still growing, and a big part of what we do as an agency and with All Flows is try to help to kind of develop that creative community in the city. Having said that, it does have a very rich history of working with kind of artists and bringing exciting people into the city right from the early days of Milton Keynes Development Corporation. You know, art was used to help build communities.
Today I'm joined by Richard Wiggins and Simon Wright, co-founders of All Flows, the Milton Keynes Creativity and Design Festival, Pooleyville, a multidisciplinary creative agency also based in Milton Keynes, and Milton Keynes Geek Night. These guys are busy boys, and we're going to talk about collaboration, people, scenes, communities, connection, and art in making a city. This is the Creative Condition. How are you doing, guys? My name is Ben Talon. I am the founder of the Creative Condition, a creativity coach, illustrator, writer, and host of the Creative Condition podcast. Welcome back if you're a regular listener. I love you for coming back and being here regularly. Welcome if you're new. I hope you like what you find. I hope you're interested in developing and understanding your creativity better than ever before, because that's what I'm here to try to help you do. I love this thing. This show has been going for 11 years. It is a resource bringing in all kinds of people to share their experience of creativity so that you can develop yours. I believe creativity is a massive part to play in our societies, in our lives. I think it's a fundamental of the human condition for our happiness, to be quite honest. So that's where you find me as I check in for another week of the Creative Condition. So hello, I hope you're doing well. Quick thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X. They're a global illustration and animation agency representing just a stunning roster of artists. Really, really great stuff on there. You need it, they'll have it. From line drawing to fashion illustration to live and large scale work to GIFs, interiors. It's all going on over there, and they do a lot of great work for the creative industry, protecting our intellectual property and the likes. So see what they're up to now at illustrationx.com. Also like to thank the Ukrainian Institute, a tremendous organisation supporting the embattled and inspiring Ukrainian creative community during this horrific time of war. Check them out at ui.org.ua and see how you can share and support their work with a couple of clicks. Really important decisions you can make. So welcome back. How are you doing, guys? I hope you're good. I hope you've been feeling well. I've been on the up this year, by and large. As I record this, I'm emerging from what has been actually quite a stressful day. I had a quick turnaround job this morning, but it's not just work stress. I feel tired. I was up north visiting family and friends late last week, and I drove back down on Saturday, and I find as I get older, I'm in my early 40s now, the travel is tiring. It wipes me out. The stimulus of catching up with all them people and being here, there and everywhere. And it's the same with my coaching sessions. I find that there's quite a backlash. Mentally, I have to really manage and look after myself. I'm a very sensitive person. And I find that if I don't police that and I take on too much, which I think I've done a little of today, then what is it that they say, the psychologists? The stress jug is overflowing. And that's what's been happening, I think, this morning. Feeling calmer now this afternoon. Done a little meditating. I'm getting there. The self-awareness has been heightened through this time of suffering anxiety that I've mentioned to you guys before. Always happy to talk about that stuff. So get in touch, ben@bentalon.com. Always happy to throw around my learnings about the mental health. It's been a central cause of my work for a long time now. Some of you who've been here a long time might remember I voluntarily directed a campaign on behalf of the Campaign Against Living Miserably. Wonderful charity here in the UK, helping people to manage their mental health, particularly guys, because the statistics around suicide are really tragic. I think it's roughly 3 to 1 for the amount of guys who take their own lives compared to girls. I think there's an emotional openness that tends to happen more with girls. I think that's the grounding of their work. But I did this campaign where I explored the artistic expression, the emotional benefits of artistic expression. I got to talk to the likes of Danny Dyer and Stephen Merchant and Mick Foley and Ken Garland, and it was a really important piece of work for me because it opened the door to writing and podcasting and many other things, just by doing this thing for the sheer love of it, which I think is what we have to do to channel that creativity. But just to say that I hope you guys are feeling well, and if you're not, I'm no counsellor, but I'm happy to just knock things around and talk about my own experiences is what I try to do on this podcast. So that said, today's guests, I'm with Rich Wiggins and Simon Wright. So Pooleyville is the agency they both run together along with Will Cousins. A lot of experience between these guys. Simon has worked as a creative producer and curator for over 15 years. He was previously the curator at Milton Keynes Gallery of Public Programmes. He's co-founder and director of Outlands Networks and has developed and delivered programmes for MK Fringe Festival and Contemporary Art. He was also the chair of trustees for Motus between 2016 and 2022, which is a contemporary dance charity based in Milton Keynes. And Rich had me to speak at the MK Geek Night, which is awesome. Really broad spread of speakers they get on for that. If you get the chance to visit, it's well worth it. And they also run All Flows, tremendous festival together. I recommend that one too, because Milton Keynes has got a lot going on. We're going to talk about it today, but it's a unique city in that it was custom designed, It's a very recent city. All Flows this year is running from the 13th to the 15th of May. You can check them out at allflows.live, where you can get your tickets and see the lineup of speakers. Looking at the website right now, they're going to be joined by a stellar selection, including Rob Draper. I saw Rob speak at Off Festival in 2024. Stunning stuff. Rob's work's incredible. I've looked at his Instagram. Beautiful videos. Paloma Rincon, Jonathan Barnbrook, Pitch Studios, Annie Atkins, Olivia Arthur, Templo, Pip Jameson. I'm not going to read everything, but it looked like a fantastic lineup in a really interesting place. So I suggest you go and check out what they're up to. Check out Pooleyville at pooleyville.uk. But today we're going to be talking about community and connection, because I think it's something that we need in these times. I was in my hometown of Keighley last week, and it feels very tired. It feels very run down. A lot of shops closing as retail changes, as we know what's going on out there. But what I do want to say is that I believe that every town and city should have a space for connection, a free, funded community hall, that you don't have to spend £4 on a coffee, that you don't have to buy a pint, that you can be in a space with local people to talk, to connect, to see people for the reality of who they are, and not buy into the fear of headlines turning us against our neighbours and people who are different to us. It makes me really sad when I see places in decline, and I see it all the time in a lot of smaller towns that don't have middle class money, and I think the solution doesn't need to be overly complex, even though the problem might be. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about connection. We're going to talk about what's in a city and the personality of a place and the findings that they've had from their work across Pooleyville, All Flows and MK Geek Night. So I hope you enjoy this chat. A big thank you again to illustrationx.com. Go and check them out. Wonderful work, and the Ukrainian Institute over at ui.org.ua. If you want to work with me coaching one-to-one, I've got bookings available right now. I can help you get your ducks in a row, understand yourself better. We can uncover your story, point you in the right direction, and do a deep dive through my Anatomy of Creativity framework. So get in touch, or you can read up now at thecreativecondition.com/coach for all that stuff. The rest of my resources are there, including the podcast archive, the reading list, and the articles that I write. So, this cause of creativity just rumbles on, and I hope you enjoy today's conversation that you're going to get right now with Richard Wiggins and Simon Wright. Sorry, I had a blank moment there. Simon Wright. Enjoy.
Yeah, keeping busy, never paying, never earning very much is our, I think that's our motto. Is that
I
always,
think,
always busy, always poor?
yeah,
I think relative. I think maybe that's industry wide. I don't know. Yeah,
Maybe, yeah, we do hear it. We do hear it
I
a lot.
think so. And I think it's interesting as well because we're not really like a kind of traditional sort of creative agency either. You know, we don't do loads of kind of client work or pitch for work and stuff like that. So a lot of what we do is all kind of self-initiated. So it's
yeah,
trying it's trying to find ways to make all of that work,
yeah.
to do what we want to do, but also to pay ourselves a little bit of
Yeah,
money.
Well, of course, yeah, yeah. That's got to
Yeah.
come, got to come somewhere, hasn't it? I mean, we'd all
Yeah.
like to, we'd all love to just to get up and do it and not have to worry about that. But we're under capitalism, so unfortunately, we have to, don't
yeah.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
exactly. Exactly.
we?
that's it.
I always like to start with childhood. So if you could paint us a picture of, what did that look like for you guys, and any kind of early signs that you might be, the people you've become, creatively inclined.
Wow.
Oh wow,
That's a big
yeah, that's
one.
going back.
Um, so we moved around quite a lot when I was younger. So I'm kind of a forces baby, essentially. Um, and I've got two kind of older brothers. So we moved around the kind of UK quite a lot when I was kind of growing up, and then eventually sort of settled, I guess, in Milton Keynes in the kind of late 80s. But I think it's always creativity, art, drawing has always been kind of in me, right from early kind of childhood. And my older brother similarly has a kind of really, um, he's really got a really great kind of artistic talent. My grandfather had it. So it's always like something that's been in sort of my memory or been around kind of growing up. And then, yeah, right through kind of school and then into kind of university. So my background's actually more in contemporary art. I studied fine art at university. And then over the years, I guess gradually became sort of more involved in curating and kind of public programs, community engagement work through my role at Milton Keynes Gallery. But yeah, it's always been there in me somewhere deep inside, influences or just kind of curiosity. Um, yeah, how you kind of translate your ideas onto paper is always something that's there.
You mentioned you were a forces baby. I'm always interested by people who have a quite a nomadic childhood. Did that influence the way you see the world? Do you think that plays a part now?
Um, well, I am a pacifist, so that's kind of it's an interesting one. Um, but I think it gives you the ability to be quite adaptable to new situations and also the ability to talk to people and connect with people because you have to, right? You might get moved in a year's time and you'd be in a completely new set of circumstances. So you're kind of you build up that kind of resilience. And I think I come from a very kind of social family anyway, the community around the forces. My parents were both really kind of active in that kind of sports and social side of things. But then when my dad left and when we ended up in Milton Keynes, he became very much involved in the community, and was part of like a kind of community centre as a kind of chairman, helping to kind of bring community together. So that influence as well of him doing that and my parents being really active within the community is definitely something that I've sort of taken on board and kind of continued into my sort of career.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Mm.
And how about you, Reg?
Probably to a certain extent, probably very opposite to Simon. I've quite never moved around much, ever. I never went to university, so I've always stayed local here. I guess in terms of like growing up, there wasn't much, I guess, massive amount of creativity in my family, really, if I'm honest. So where that came from, I don't know in terms of influence, but I was always drawing when I was quite young. I remember like comic type stuff a little bit, things like that. I was also quite, I guess I went more down the graphical side of it, and I would often drawing like planes and cars and things like that, but also a lot of architecture stuff. So I'd sit there just more like when I was really young, just drawing like love drawing plans of houses and stuff, when I was really quite young and just sit there and like, A3 sketchbooks or whatever and like, just like doing that in my bedroom. And I think that's probably I was quite sure what I wanted, and areas I wanted to go in. Initially, I probably did want to be an architect. I think when I was quite young, I was thinking about it, and then learned how long you have to study, and I wasn't much of a studier as well, which is probably hence why I didn't go to university, which I do regret partly. But um, yeah, I think so. I sort of ditched that, but I was very much still like, I think that graphical drawing element was quite of interest to me. And going into secondary school, I think like that, I was still drawn to those kind of subjects more. Was okay at maths, and I think maybe that plays into some of that element as well, and less so on like literature side of it and things like that. But I remember getting work experience. My teacher at the time knew I was quite interested in that area, and a lot of work experience was usually quite dull. You end up doing something you have absolutely zero interest in. But there was a local a small graphic design agency based quite near, not far from where we are to a certain extent in the city anyway. And there was an opportunity there, and it was like one of the rare kind of like proper, career path opportunities. And I basically managed to get in there and like do a week there when I was like whatever it was 15 or something. And that just cemented for me like, yeah, this is really interesting. This is kind of the route I want to go down. Got on really well, enjoyed it. It was a super small, like I think it was a team of like 3 or 4 people and stuff. But yeah, that kind of I think cemented that kind of route of going down there, and I guess it's kind of stuck in that area. Ended up slightly, I guess, different. Ended up becoming actually a web designer more than a traditional designer. So I was very much digital based in my early career, trainee web designer when it was a new kind of thing, like back in the late 90s. And,
Mm.
we didn't have if we had a computer, we probably had computers at home, basic computers, but you didn't have internet at home and things like that. So it was like web designer, what's this? But yeah, that's kind of like where I went from. And I guess so I guess more down the digital side than the graphic side, but I guess that's my area. But in terms of how I've got to where we are now, but yeah, I don't know, because it's like, I guess my parents were quite sociable. Certainly my dad was quite sociable. I wasn't growing up. Again, I wasn't that confident in certain groups, but I guess I was quite a sociable person. But how I get into sort of a lot of, I guess, where we got to now is come from, which you've spoken at, was running things like Milton Keynes Geek Night, MK Geek Night, and which has been going for like over 13 and a half years now, whatever it is. And that again, that came out of nowhere. I think that was just a lack of sort of like more like frustration of nothing happening in the city, and it's just like let's try and do something here. I think going to the events and going to other conferences and design events and meetups that kind of I think got me more sociable as well. Slowly into that. Like I really enjoyed being around that other people in those industries, and I guess there wasn't so much, or I didn't know so much of the community where I lived at the time. There wasn't much happening here. So I think that's kind of how I kind of brought maybe two of those things together, really. And I guess just brought inspiration for where we are now, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is something that I noticed yesterday. Creative Boom, Katie put out a thing about the kind of loneliness and isolation since the pandemic that some people feel from working from home. And the point that I made in the comments thread was it was something I picked up on in a book called The Creativity Choice by Zara Pringle, who is she has a fascinating job. She works at Harvard University and she's a scientist, but specializing in the study of creativity. And this book was about what differentiates people who are able to sustain creativity, be it professionally or personally, and achieve results with that, and the ones that kind of fall at the first hurdle through lack of self-belief, whatever that might look like. And one of the core traits of people who are able to do that was contradiction. And I found that interesting in what you said there, Rich, about, that classic thing of don't consider myself overly social and yet I'm doing all these things. It's like many of us are like that in this industry. We can be equally happy tucked away listening to podcasts for hours on end on our own. But we also love that, that kind of hum of feeling seen and connected in environments like the ones that you guys brilliantly curate. I just find that really interesting, that kind of contradictory side that we often carry around as creatively inclined people.
No, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely that sort of mix of introvert and extrovert going on within everyone, actually. But I think it's interesting, like how you kind of maintain a creative kind of career or kind of just the production of work. I guess in a way, I always wanted to be an artist, but I didn't sustain my kind of artistic practice, and that then moves on to how can I be within these kind of environments? How can I kind of work with artists? Because I always kind of felt, particularly when I was at university, I actually really enjoyed working with my peers, and I guess the kind of particular scenarios that we had at that university was like it forced us to work collaboratively as well. Sorry, excuse me, and support each other. So there is, all of these kind of things mixing in, but there is that sort of frustration that I don't make any work anymore. I don't paint, I don't draw, I don't, make films or anything like that. But actually, maybe um, that is an artwork, bringing communities together. That is making art in some way, if that makes any sense.
Well, no, it is, and an interesting experience with this recently, and it's often it's surprising where we pull creative fulfillment. I mentioned earlier, chatting before the show, that I'd written Hector's book. Now that was an exercise in creative writing. It was 12 hours of deep conversations, hearing about a person's life, then interpreting that in a kind of very prosy short story. That's what we felt reflected Hector's life. Now fast forward, and the guys at Paradiso brought me in to work on another designer's biography. Completely different person to Hector, very quiet, very introverted. This has ended up being a book coaching exercise as opposed to me overtly writing. Now, if you'd said that to me before we started this process, I might have kind of balked at that and thought, oh God, but what about my creativity? I want to be doing this. Actually, I've taken as much creative fulfillment from that process, because what I realize is actually it's the connection and being around creative people and having those conversations like we're having today, that actually, as my career's developed, you realize that. And I think it's this constant self-awareness journey that we're on.
Yeah, yeah. I 100% agree with that. And again, it's almost a little bit, we've never really talked about that so much, but I know Simon does get, I guess, pretty frustrated that he's not, and I'm still doing it a bit, but I've always never been very confident in my work personally. I've always felt imposter syndrome, and I think partly because I've ended up for a long part of my career being a bit of a generalist, I guess, because I've been more in that digital side of it. I've not focused on one area of it, and I've never specifically, and again, I had never studied beyond, I guess, that sixth form kind of thing. I never did that, and I guess I never really maybe sharpened some of my tools as much as I could have done. And I'd still deliver stuff now, but I guess to a certain extent trying to talk us down is like, well, why don't do a lot of, I guess, typical agency work and client work, because it's like we are a bit generalist. Even what we do, we're very different. We're not kind of like, well, there's better graphic designers than me, there's better web designers than me, or there's better, UX. So it's kind of like, so I think, well, and again, to a certain extent, it's probably why I end up doing some of those things. It's being around those people and bringing those people together, where it's probably been some of I get a real that
Learning.
kind of that learning, and but also that that's if I can't be as good, but let's surround myself with people who are much better, and just appreciate that, I think. So
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot to be said for that sort of peer-to-peer learning opportunities. You kind of you get inspired what people are doing, and that's really important. And also for me, it's a kind of complete new journey as well. I come from the kind of fine art background, and the kind of history of design and designers, motion designers, all of these kind of different kind of disciplines. I'm constantly kind of absorbing stuff, as we're thinking about how we kind of program the festivals. We're finding new people and new ways of kind of working, that we're inspired by. I think a big part of how we curate and invite speakers, we're inspired by their work, and and that's a bit selfish, maybe. We want to hear them kind of speak, but we also think, our audiences, thankfully, since we started, we've had like great responses to the kind of programs that we've been sort of putting together, and people travel from across the country and internationally to come to it. So I think, yeah, that's a bit of sort of selfishness on our part,
yeah,
and
100%.
and I think, you never stop. It is a bit of a cliche, but you never stop learning, right?
Well, you don't, and I would actually counter that. I would argue that that's selfish in as much as I think it's more about curation and that we live in a world now that's pumped with algorithmic recommendations.
Yeah.
And there's a great book about this called Filter World by Kyle Chaker, who writes for the New Yorker, and he talks about that, the importance of that. Going back to record store well, you know, I mean, there's a lot of record stores around now. We're in something of a renaissance, which is beautiful. But he talks about that, you know, why the record store person behind the counter has such kudos, and it's that. I don't think it's necessarily about selfishness, but it's trust in the human recommendation. And actually, there's joy to be taken from someone else's joy of art. And I
Yeah,
think that actually what makes any kind of festival unique is that curation. And I think that it's really important. So I would argue that it's not selfishness. I think maybe it's indulgence, but the right kind of indulgence. And that's infectious.
yeah, absolutely. 100% agree.
It's something we lean into quite a lot of what we do, and to a certain extent, what even some of our client work is actually about curation. So we've done some of the projects we have done for clients is like locally in the city. We do a lot of the work here with local authorities and other organisations, and it's like running. We do physical in-person like placemaking events. We know a bit not a festival, but we have done stuff where we're bringing people together, and you know, for a client to sort of make something more vibrant or bring people to a space that they're trying to activate and things like that. And that's all about curation, right? It's just like how can we bring things that we think are quite interesting and cool, and you know, maybe slightly less well, some of them less well known, you know, maybe not mainstream, just in whatever like wherever that area of context is, but like bring them to be. And I think that's that kind of a little bit selfishness, but a bit of that kind of what we've always lent into since we've been a business, as well as like running yeah, pre all flows and things.
Yeah, and you know, and if you're just putting on what you think is the sort of expected out there, or the stuff that's hot at the moment, then suddenly you become replicable. You become like every other blog or every other festival, and that's not why people go to things.
And it is a bit of a challenge for us because we're quite broad. I'm not saying to some of them, but certainly some of the design festivals and events, conferences, we're very multidisciplinary with our lineup. You know, we have, yes, we will have graphic design and motion design, but we'll have photography or sound, or material, you know, future materials, or very, and I guess it's quite broader. And we also at the same time we have a really deliberate small lineup. You know, it's generally 12 speakers over 2 days, you know, with time in between. So there's not like, and we don't have multi-track, you know, with our events, things like that. So but partly because of, I guess, physical challenges, but it's never been of interest to us as well. We like just having that kind of like, you know, that kind of space where everyone's together in the same room. But yeah, it's also, yeah, it's just a small lineup, but broad with what they do. So, and again, it's coming back to that. We find it interesting. It's not just one specific topic. And again, our audience has lent into that, and people keep coming back and seem to enjoy that. So,
Yeah, and am I right in thinking that Milton Keynes has quite a rich kind of multidisciplinary heritage, you know, around technology and the likes as well? Is that reflected in that decision?
I think, I mean, Milton Keynes is really important to us, you know, because obviously, you know, it's our hometown. We kind of largely grew up in Milton Keynes, our formative years, and I think, you know, we certainly, I guess, my time as kind of curator of public programs at the gallery enabled me to sort of engage with the city a lot more, and its kind of history and its kind of radical design heritage. You know, we were doing lots of programs when I was there that was connecting with some of the original urban designers or architects that designed this kind of new city in the kind of late 60s, early 70s. And I think that story is really important. A lot of the work that we do outside of All Flows is with the kind of heritage department at the council, how we can kind of keep that story, how we preserve that story, how we kind of engage new audiences and new communities in this story, you know, because it is also, it's internationally known as a kind of uniquely designed kind of place in the kind of UK. But then also, you know, we know that it's only 60 years old, and we know that there's still so much more for this kind of town to kind of continue to sort of develop. Culturally, for example, you know, we're still growing, and a big part of what we do as an agency and with All Flows is try to help to kind of develop that creative community in the city. Having said that, it does have a very rich history of working with kind of artists and bringing exciting people into the city right from the early days of Milton Keynes Development Corporation. You know, art was used to help build communities, you know, so, you know, it was artists were kind of commissioned to create new public artworks that were basically participatory projects. There was artists in residence, there was very early innovative work going on around like community television. And it was right at that moment of the kind of radical community arts kind of movement that was going on in the kind of early sort of 70s. So all of these kind of influences that helped found the city, I guess, is kind of in our heads constantly. I mean, the technology thing as well. Outside of this, we're part of another project called Protospace, which is about bringing the sort of tech and innovation community in the city together, right from sort of academia, big employers to the kind of smaller startups and entrepreneurs. I guess to kind of make it more kind of connected, but also to sort of shout about it as a kind of hub for new technology and innovation happening in the city. But again, Milton Keynes has always, because of its very nature, it's always been a place where it's been a bit of a test bed for things, right? For new sort of technologies. We have Starship robots that kind of deliver groceries and various things around the city. I think there was an article in
New York Times
that talked about the Starship robots in Milton Keynes. It was particularly during COVID, they were kind of incredibly sort of used, ways to get things to kind of isolated people. But there's always been that kind of a city of firsts, or a pioneering kind of spirit, and a willingness to take risks. Some things work, some things don't.
It's that testing, it's being that pilot, and there's been lots of quotes and posts and things we're involved. We've been using them about we're doing stuff here in Milton Keynes that will be in other cities in the future, kind of thing. I think it's that kind of experimentation throughout everything, because there's been here through the architecture, through the way that the city's been built, and now and tested and used for businesses and organizations and ways of working. I think it's kind of like it's still new for that. So I think it's something we're involved with outside of, I guess, the All Flows program, but that's also, it feeds into our thinking a little bit as well. So how can those audiences are also in, get involved or be interested in the program, or does it influence who we invite? Sometimes from a speaker point of view, sometimes it's definitely interesting. I mean, even 2024, we had Nick Ryan, who is working on a piece of public art which is using technology here in the city. So that was something that hasn't been released yet in terms of the piece of public art, but that was quite interesting. So excuse me, he'd done a lot of other interesting, not traditional public art in the UK, and now has been commissioned to work on this for in Bletchley. Well, it's going to be in Bletchley. Right?
It's in Bletchley. It's essentially like a tribute to Alan Turing. He's using kind of AI, and he's sort of talking to the local residents, and there'll be some sort of work that's kind of produced up there. It's primarily working with sort of sound, but I guess his most famous piece was a piece in the Strand in London, which I've completely forgotten the name.
Voice line.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. I'm a big believer in that kind of cross-pollination that you talk about, and I really think that we need it in today's world, with the multitude of problems that we face. I think that pulling down the boundaries between disciplines is on, and I'm not just talking about artistic disciplines, I'm talking about science and engineering, with arts. And I think that's bringing those minds together is how we pioneer anything. I think that I did a show a little while ago it was talking to somebody about AT&T in the 60s, how they funded a couple of research labs called Bell Labs and EAT. I forget what EAT stands for now. Something arts and technology, and
it's experiment in art and technology.
Right. Yeah. So you're aware of it. Yeah. And he said, "What is magic?" That idea of Andy Warhol and whoever else from that time being put together with scientists and engineers. It's like, why would you not do that when we have to crack pressing problems? Yeah. So that excites me to hear that that's going on. And it immediately sets you apart as different, and that goes back to that curation that we talked about.
Yeah. I'm really interested in that sort of area, where artists are kind of working within different kind of contexts, or with scientists or technologists, and that's really, really exciting. I think some of the conversations we've had through the Protospace project, I think there's they recognize that, I'm quite different in terms of my background, but being in the room with people whose backgrounds are much more in sort of technology and innovation, I think that's really, really interesting. I think it's similar to like the artist placement group as well, which where they were putting artists into kind of industry, and how artists' thinking was being kind of absorbed into kind of other worlds,
Mhm.
and how businesses or other kind of organizations might be sort of developed. I'm always fascinated by that, I guess the role of the artist or the creative mind in other areas.
Yeah, just seeing things differently.
Mm.
You bring a different mindset to things. Um, I've got, we've talked about so many great things here, and I never did touch upon Pooleyville. So tell us a little about Pooleyville, and I'm interested in the origin of the word as well, because I only found out through researching this show that it predates Milton Keynes. Is that right? Was that a kind of pilot almost or a prototype?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, and we again, it slightly goes back to some of the work that I was doing at the gallery. So I used to, as I said earlier, about hosting these sort of events with original kind of employees, designers, urban designers, and architects from the Development Corporation. There's a really great kind of, I guess, a sort of local historian called Tim Skelton, who was doing a lot of work around, I guess, research into the kind of city. But he invited a gentleman called Bill Barrett to come and speak at the gallery. And Bill worked with Fred Pooley in the kind of architect's office in Aylesbury. So Fred was the kind of architect for Buckinghamshire, basically, in the kind of, I guess, late 50s, early 60s. And him and Bill were sort of charged with coming up with this design for a new city in Buckinghamshire for 250,000 people. And that plan essentially got dubbed Pooleyville. And that just Pooleyville kind of stuck in my head as a really kind of curious name. And we can go back a bit to kind of why I guess we started as a sort of creative agency. But um, yeah, essentially it was the plan that preceded Milton Keynes.
Yeah.
So this was in the kind of early 60s. There's some really incredible kind of illustrations and sort of proposals for this kind of new town. But it featured a kind of free monorail system, which would have been incredible. But gradually, as the kind of development corporation got started, Fred Pooley's kind of plan got sort of watered down or changed, and he was involved in the kind of early days of the development corporation, but then it sort of changed to what it is currently today. But yeah, I guess I always thought it was a kind of a cute name to talk about place or possibilities of place, um, without saying Milton Keynes. There was lots of things going on, and even to a certain extent, Milton Keynes Geek Night. It's like how do we talk about place without saying Milton Keynes?
Yeah.
Basically.
It came into, I guess, our business was around this conversation to how when Simon and I had met through MK Geek Night, being hosted at the gallery, and we became friends before we ever worked together. And over a number of years, Simon has always done a lot of work outside the gallery as well around creative communities in Milton Keynes and other areas. And it's like there's no good media, there's no good voice for telling any of this stuff in Milton Keynes at the moment. It's local media is pretty poor. It's kind of some of the really traditional stuff, and the newspapers at the time weren't great, and the online versions of them are awful to consume. And again, it's just they're telling news, but there's getting in a format you just can barely read anything because it's full of ads or whatever and stuff like that. So but there was still nothing telling the kind of lot of not much around telling the story, what's going on, what's happened, but also who's doing stuff now, or who's gone on to do interesting things for Milton Keynes. And so I was always interested about kept talking to me about, maybe we could have this idea of doing a website or doing a project around talk about culture. And then it came to sort of just not long before pre-COVID actually, and there was Simon, myself, and a friend and colleague at the time, Daniel Shahade, who's a local graphic designer, were coming together about started to actually talk about creating a publication. So it was actually like, how can we do something print, maybe digital as well, put something together which starts to tell some of these stories and this history and, the possibilities in the future and the conversations. And Pooleyville was when you suggested, and it was a working title to start with. Actually, it was like, oh, let's, and then immediately we're like, that's it. It's got to be that.
Yeah.
And it was obviously a back burner side project, and at the time, Simon had just kind of left the gallery to sort of pursue other things anyway. And then I was working for myself, and Daniel was doing his individual work, and then it literally kind of came into COVID, but then an opportunity, I won't get into details, but basically a commercial project came along, and it was a little bit different. It was more about, again, a bit more of a placemaking project, but actually largely about curation. And the person who suggested at the time is also now our business partner. And we actually basically needed to start a business. And at the time, we need to start a business quite quickly because it was like we had this possible contract. So it was like, we need to form a company now. So we just called it Pooleyville out of like, well, that's what we've kind of come together around. So it ended up becoming our business as well. And the magazine, the cultural platform kind of, it's definitely taken a bit of a back seat because it's a passion project, something we are really, really keen to do. And so it became a digital platform. So we have I guess I'm not always very up to date, a Pooleyville agency website, but we have another website, pooleyville.city, which has started to tell some of those longer form stories and articles from people around the city, and some of it's visuals. We kind of like very, again, curated. Simon does a lot of work around that. And we also have a bi-weekly newsletter. Again, it's that curation. So it's things around the city, but also things that catch our eye internationally, anywhere that's like, oh, this is a really good book, you should go read this. And so we do that, and we've been doing that for like 5 years, every 2 weeks, and sending that out. Not a massive following, but it's quite a niche. It's kind of like people. But the idea is that we want to still create a publication which is talks about some of those interesting things in the city and has come from the city, but it's not just for the people of Milton Keynes. Our ambition is to tell that in a context where you could pick it up from mag culture in London, or from design, mag shop in Berlin or Hamburg or wherever it may be. That's our aspiration, is to kind of tell these stories, and that it's not just solely about Milton Keynes. It's telling it again from a creativity, artistic, architecture, how these conversations, and we are actually literally in the throes of pushing that forward more in an actual kind of a lightweight publication, which we're looking to do more like a mini newspaper. Right now, in the next couple of months, that's something we are working on in the background as well. How we can get that actually to print quite soon, and become a bit more of a regular publication, while still the ambition is to do that kind of nice, real kind of glossy print as well. That's in the back burner. So, but that's kind of like, I guess, come into what's become
why Pooleyville?
Why Pooleyville?
I love that though, and I love that, you're right. I think there is interest in place from beyond the place. I think that, when you look back at significant cultural movements in the past, be it, New York artists in the 60s, or the YBA in London, and, it transcends the place, doesn't it? And I think when it's done right, and there's enough interest, particularly in that curation by the people doing it, then that does go beyond. And I think that you're right to do that. And there's another facet to that, which I've heard termed as the probative conversation, which is what I guess this podcast serves as for me, which is almost your kind of passion and authority in what you're trying to do, that precedes you, that it's the conversation that happens before you're even in the room. And I think that brings its own rewards. You must have found along the way that begins conversations for you guys that have been fruitful, a bit before you've even known they were happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also it's how we can activate a kind of bigger collective of people that are in the city as well. We have a really kind of great sort of peer group of designers and musicians and artists and kind of writers and photographers that we kind of collaborate with on particular projects, but also we want to sort of shout about the amazing work that they do, and push that out there, but also to kind of reconnect with some of the people that have kind of grew up in the city and have gone on to do sort of amazing things as well.
Hmm.
and to bring back those sort of voices into the kind of conversation. Because Milton Keynes is constantly thinking about what's next, what's next, what's next, as a place, um, as that kind of test bed for kind of new things, as a city that is still growing physically and kind of as a kind of community. But I think those sorts of people who have that sort of lived experience of Milton Keynes and understand it, who have gone on to do, you know, great things internationally. Like in particular, we had a conversation with Mark Dytham recently, who's an architect who's based in Tokyo, um, potentially about speaking in the future at All Flows. But he's kind of set up a very successful architecture practice in Tokyo called Klein Dytham. Also was the founder of Pechakucha Nights, with the global kind of phenomena that is kind of Pechakucha, and also Super Deluxe, which is a really sort of influential music venue in sort of Tokyo. He came from Milton Keynes. He got his start in architecture through the sort of development corporation. He won a scholarship to go and travel to Japan as a student through Milton Keynes Development Corporation. So it's those sorts of stories that I think are really important to kind of tell, and to bring those kind of people back into the city to talk about Milton Keynes as I guess, as a kind of not a place that people think it is.
Yeah.
The perception of the city is still, concrete roundabouts, all of that sort of thing. And it's for us, it's very, very different. And we're sort of advocates for the city, and
Yeah.
advocates for those people that have grown up here and have gone on to do great things, and the people that are still here. We really want to sort of
Yeah.
champion that.
Yeah. I mean, we're critical as well. Don't get me wrong. There's things that, we'd love to see better or move quicker, or, some more support for certain things. But, if we can do anything and support other people and inspire other people and be involved with other projects and help each other. And I think, and coming back to what it's really important for us to do, what we do all flows is here. We've been asked by and suggested by various people, like, what, why don't you come and host it at Somerset House? Or why don't you come and do it we could do this a new space in Oxford. It's like, well, that'd be kind of cool, but for us is the moment is we do it because it's not our financial gain. We're doing it because we want to do some event and bring the people to the city and do it in our hometown, and that's super important to just kind of like do it here, and yeah, just bring people in. And I think and when people do come, it feels like a bit more of a win for us. I mean, I'm not, again, not being negative against Milton Keynes, but we're not Barcelona, we're not London, Manchester even, we're in Paris, whatever it may be, in Amsterdam. We're not somewhere a lot of these events are held in, I guess, more visitor destinations to a certain extent. And that's growing here in Milton Keynes, and people are becoming to visit more and experience a bit more of that. But it's still like we're not that. So when people do pay and come and see us, and not around the UK or further afield in across the globe, it's like every
It's very
every
meaningful.
every ticket sale for us is like that's great. Or when you see that, oh my God, they're coming from wherever, Dusseldorf, they're coming from New York, like, oh my God,
Yeah.
that's crazy for us, and we are quite small, and we do everything we do is on a minuscule budget in reality compared to a lot of other people. But yeah, it means a lot for us.
Those flagship places are wonderful, but most places are not those places. And I think it's really important to have voices like yours that I think serve as something of a bridge between the fledgling community, people who might not have the bravery or the know-how how to step forward when they've got things to say and work to produce, and then also the local authorities, which I think I've certainly been guilty in my younger years of being very dismissive about the role of local authorities and just assuming that they A, wouldn't care, B, wouldn't give a shit if they knew I existed. Whereas actually, I think when you're willing to have a conversation and listen to people objectively from both sides, that's important, particularly for smaller places that don't have the infrastructure that a New York or a Dusseldorf might have. Has that been something that you guys have done? Have you connected those voices at grassroots and then they kind of had the conversations with the authorities and found results there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we're, I think Milton Keynes is really fortunate in that the council, the local authority, are they invest in culture. and they keep investing in culture, and it's been very much part of the genesis of the city. The Development Corporation led the way with commissioning artists to help build communities by commissioning new public artworks consistently over its kind of 60-year period. So I think, yeah, there's always a kind of an open door, and then there's always a kind of conversation with the kind of local council, which I think, and they've been great supporters of ours over multiple kind of projects.
Yeah.
So I think, unlike some other places, it's challenging times out there. Budgets are really tight, but I think, we are fortunate in Milton Keynes that, yeah, they see the importance of art and culture in the kind of future trajectory of the city. And I think also, we've been here a long time. We're kind of really embedded within the kind of city and know lots of different people, have, lots of different organizations. Um, and I think, we very much hope that we're facilitators and supporters of the wider grassroots creative scene across Milton Keynes, and whatever platform we have, we always try to ensure that there is space for people here, emerging artists that might be just starting out, whatever, that we always try and give something in any project that we're doing. We're supporting each other, and I think that's really, really important. There's some incredibly talented people here doing work all over the place. But yeah, I think anything that we can do to say, this is a really vibrant and growing scene is a good thing.
Absolutely. And, I wanted to hit upon also just the kind of, much like the artistic process, with events, invariably you'll find starting anything new that you've got to be forgiving to yourself and getting a few things wrong. And I'm sure you guys have also found that out along the way. I used to be part of an open mic night in Manchester when we were running a project called Quenched Music, which was essentially my vehicle with a close friend of mine to get access to music, to working in music that we wanted to do. Didn't have any other way of doing it. So we set up a little company. We kind of talked our way into things we weren't ready to do, and we got things wrong. And in a really productive way, quite shambolic in that way that, I remember my friend kind of just shadowing the sound guy in a little pub called Gulliver's in Manchester on Oldham Street, and he ended up learning his craft that way and getting into these new areas. And it is my excuse to make a gig poster and to put bands on that we liked, and it was as simple as that. And you learn and you get more technically astute as you move along. But I think with any artistic process, including events, it's vitally important to be forgiving and to expect a few things to go wrong and to feel out the process. Has that been the case with you guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, as much as you do what you can, you want it to go, everything perfectly, things go wrong or things don't go it's quite as you planned them to be. And we're tweaking the program, we're tweaking how it's structured every year. We're always trying to, and we're learning from others, right? We go to other events and it's like, oh, how are we doing that? That's okay. Maybe that would work better for us if we shifted this around and did, try. Oh, let's try it. And it's, it is 99% of the time that is run by to us, and it's not obviously we spend a lot of time on it, but we're just working on that as well. So it's kind of like, you put a lot of pressure on our shoulders as well. And so hopefully people do forgive us. And sometimes we get a bit emotional as well, at the events and the second day. I've definitely been those moments where I think you just pour so much stress and love into it. You just like, I want this to go right. I want this to go right. But yeah.
I think last year, 2025, we felt, we started in 23 after having too much coffee and just going, let's do this. And then, by last year, I think we both sort of felt actually it felt really good in terms of like the flow of it, everything, the response from the audience, the response from kind of speakers, everything felt it just felt like we got to a really good place. And, we had to kind of very much kind of learn very quickly in the first year. The second year we were in a different venue, so that was a whole other set of kind of stress. And then we sort of gone back to sort of our original venue. But yeah, it definitely felt like we're getting in a sort of flow, and I think the support of people like yourself and Creative Boom and various other kind of people within the kind of creative community has been fantastic. And the partnerships that we've kind of been able to sort of develop over this kind of short period of time really gives us a lot of confidence that we're doing the right thing, and we are going to still make mistakes, but we definitely feel like we're getting into a really good place, and we're getting the event known, and by you know getting the city known as well as a sort of
Yeah.
result or as a result of that. And that's yeah, that's really, really cool. I mean, we do have plans, say loosely, like in 2027, it's the 60th anniversary of Milton Keynes. And there's lots of conversations going on at the moment around a bigger sort of cultural program to celebrate that moment. And, we're thinking about how can we do something for all flows that maybe expands upon the core, I guess, kind of 2 or 3 days that we kind of run at the moment into something that's maybe a week or longer and incorporating different locations. Maybe there's exhibitions, maybe there's installations, those sorts of things. Very early conversations. Don't want to commit to anything just yet, but
Yeah.
this is our
60 days, 60 days, 60 venues.
well,
I'm not sure we've got 60 venues.
exactly. But yeah, we want to continue to be
Yeah.
ambitious, but we don't also want to kind of lose the kind of the intimacy and the kind of quality of being like in a space with a kind of community of creative people. That's still really, really kind of
Yeah.
core to what we want to do. But we also want to kind of break out of just being in that kind of space and actually
Yeah. What else can we do?
talk to a more sort of wider
Yeah.
general sort of public
Yeah.
as part of our kind of program. And the 60th anniversary feels like a perfect opportunity to kind of test that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something of a wrap-up question, but I wanted to ask about the role of optimism in what you do, because it can be difficult in today's world to be optimistic. But I'm a big believer that you have to have a baseline of optimism to create to your potential and to make the things you want to make, because it's seeing a better future and moving towards something that drives that kind of mindset where you will take chances, where you will connect with people and be, at your best version. So I guess does the work that you're doing give you that sense of optimism? Is that a baseline for you guys, or is it something that helps you to get there?
I know we keep talking about it, Milton Keynes, but there is that spirit of optimism that is there. And I think as children of the city, I know it sounds a bit cheesy, but actually there is that sort of spirit of optimism that is there in us.
Hmm.
And you had to be kind of quite DIY in a way. You have to be kind of DIY to make things kind of happen. And that was kind of going on throughout the sort of history of Milton Keynes. And I sort of feel, yeah, I feel that sort of in me somehow. It was interesting when Richard earlier was talking about drawing plans and drawing houses and wanting to be an architect. And I think probably every creative in the city is a bit of a sort of frustrated town planner or architect in some way. We think about somehow it's in us constantly to think about what does this mean? What is this place? Like, do you know what I mean? Like what changes could happen? All of those things. So there is that kind of optimism and stubbornness and
Mm.
frustration that is kind of in us somehow to kind of keep going and keep sort of developing what we're trying to do with all flows and all of the other
All things, and
projects.
you have to be. I mean, it's scary doing this stuff. We were, you not thinking about it when we're starting this stuff. It's a hell of a leap. You've got to be optimistic that it's going to work. And
Hmm.
it almost didn't. To a certain, if we're honest, we got a bit wobbly with our first year, and then we had to shift the dates a bit, and we were just kind of like set things back a little bit because we tried to rush it, but. I guess we were optimistic, and people came, and it wasn't perfect, but yeah, I think it's there, and I think, yeah, I think it gives us that, and I think sometimes obviously that goes away at points when things don't go, it gets tough,
Of
whatever
course.
challenges you go through it, but I think that it always gives us that. It's going to be good. We'll get there. And, you got to remember that as well, because obviously there are those points, and certainly, various points in certainly pre-event, is always going to be that it's super busy and super stressful just before you go. And
But we've
uh,
had like really great support from a real dedicated team of
yeah,
volunteers as well, right from the beginning, um, who have been just incredible. And some of them come much closer into the kind of team and help us kind of deliver what we do. And also, just very early on in the conversations when we had about starting All Flows in 23, we had a really great conversation with Luke and Dan from Birmingham Design Festival. It's like they'd obviously had that experience of delivering a much larger scale event over a longer kind of period of time, incredible work. And,
yeah,
they were so generous with
yeah,
their time and advice. And they came down last year with some of their sort of team and kind of extended volunteers. So there's definitely that feeling and conversations with yourself and Katie, there's a feeling of support across the country and across the sector for what everyone's trying to do. And we want to shout about what everyone's trying to do. This is a really vibrant, interesting, exciting industry to kind of be working within. It is challenging, but there is a support network.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and that's really vital
yeah, really
to kind of
important.
making things happen.
Yeah.
It really is. It's absolutely fundamental to the arts, I think. It's just I remember it was Maragaya who put me onto you guys in the first place, who'd spoken at Geek Night, and then kindly connected me with Rich, saying I think Ben would be a good speaker, and we made that happen, which was very exciting. But also to go there and be in that room and to be speaking alongside people, like you said, from very different industries, which is very exciting to me. And it gives me great heart, to see what you guys are doing, to see what Hector's doing with now with Paradiso and previously with Off. Like you said, to feel a part of an ecosystem of contemporaries is incredibly exciting. And I actually took the time to write it all down earlier this year after Paradiso, because I came back to my little garden studio being on my own again, and I sort of thought I want to carry that energy forward now, even though I do spend a lot of days on my own. So I wrote down this kind of just this big brain dump of all these people that I exist in this moment at this time with these people who are doing something that they're passionate about to try and make the world a better place. So when I look around and see all that work going on, it helps to get you out of bed in the morning, and it helps to get you through those inevitable down moments. So yeah, keep on. I think it's really, really inspiring.
Cool.
Likewise.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, we need each other. We always have done, and I think we do in these times also. There's never been a time when that wasn't the case. So it's great, and it's certainly heightened my awareness of Milton Keynes, and it's an exciting place on my map now. Whereas it wasn't not exciting before. I just didn't know anything about it. It was just
Yeah.
somewhere my train went through going up north sometimes.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think also just that's why we really encourage people to stay a little bit longer beyond the festival, and Gemma O'Brien, who spoke last year, she ended up staying for a week in Milton
Yeah.
Keynes.
She kept extending. It was bad.
Which was incredible. She got a bike. A friend of mine lent her a bike and she biked around the city, and it was like that is for us is a beautiful thing as a result, of her speaking at All Flows, wanting to kind of experience the city beyond that one event,
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of important to us. So.
Brilliant. Well, where can people connect with you and find out more about what you're doing?
You can head to allflows.live, and we're also All Flows live on socials as well. So yeah, and if you want to find out more, just search for Pooleyville as well. If you want to find out more about us and history as well.
Brilliant. Well, this has been a pleasure, and I'm excited to see what comes next.
Yeah,
Cool.
and
Thank
thank you
you.
very much, Ben. Yeah.
Thank you so much to Richard Wiggins and Simon Wright from Pooleyville for taking the time to come and talk today for the show. I hope you'll consider checking out All Flows, which runs the 13th to the 15th of May here in the UK. Some tremendous speakers, a great energy, a fascinating city, as I hope you've realised from today's interview. I hope you'll go and check it out and taste the fruits. It's such a good lineup this year, like I mentioned earlier at the top of the show. So have a look at that. And if you get a chance to get to the MK Geek Night as well, that's beautiful. It's small, it's intimate. They have such a great range of speakers on there. Lots to learn. These guys are inspiring. I think we all need a little more community in our towns and our cities, as I mentioned earlier on. So some great insights into why that's important. Big thank you to the founding sponsor of the show, Illustration X. You can see their global range of illustrator and animator portfolios now, illustrationx.com. Also consider supporting the wonderful, important work of the Ukrainian Institute, UI ukrainian.org.ua for their website. You can share the work of Ukrainian creators. You could commission them. You can mentor them. There's many great things you can do to help them out during this scary, scary time. Creativity is so crucial. Do go back and check out the interview I did with Olya Protasova on that very topic, why art is crucial and creativity in times of war, episode 212. Great episodes coming up as ever. Stay tuned and be doing the brain dumps a bit more often recently with more whimsical thoughts. You can also check that out on the Creativity Diary at thecreativecondition.com, along with my more long form articles. Join the LinkedIn newsletter, The Creative Condition. Lots of places to connect with me. The archive of the show you'll also find there, thecreativecondition.com/pod. If you want to work one-to-one with me, let's have a conversation. Get in touch. thecreativecondition.com/coach for the coaching information, developing the practice all the time. I can help you become the creative you were born to be. That's about it from me. Thank you again to Rich and Simon for taking the time, such a stimulating, exciting, inspiring conversation. And I'll see you all soon, guys. If you want to get in touch, ben@bentalon.com. Message me on LinkedIn too, that's fine. Take care.